Today on the eye test on the Sick Podcast Network, Pierre McGuire and I look at the Minnesota Wild and also Detroit Red Wings, but then we welcome on a very special guest. The legendary Scotty Bowman joins us very shortly.
Turn up your volume. Because you're about to listen to the Sick Podcast. The Eye Test with Pierre McGuire and Jimmy Murphy.
The Stanley Cup winning Colorado Avalanche. And after 22 years, Raymond Mark!
The sickest NHL podcast. It's gonna be sick.
Hey, Jimmy Murphy here, back with Pierre McGuire on the Eye Test on the Sick Podcast Network. Pierre, how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, Jimmy. Great to visit with you. I'm very excited about our upcoming guest.
Yeah, me too. It's always a joy to talk to Scotty Bowman. Just a wealth of hockey knowledge, but we'll get to that in a bit, and you'll see what we're talking about. Pierre, look, you and I have been talking about the Minnesota Wild and their issues, and, you know, both of us saying it's not really all on Dean Evason, but there comes a time sometimes when a GM has no choice but to pull the coach and make the change there behind the bench. And that's exactly what happened as they bring in John Hynes the other day, shortly after we recorded our last episode. Your take on that change and what can John Hynes bring to this team?
Well, first of all, it comes down to a sense of familiarity type hire. Billy Guerin worked with John Hynes when John was coaching in Wilkes-Barre Scranton for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Billy was the point man for a lot of those teams, so John and Billy had a great relationship. Ray Shero, remember, was a general manager of record in Pittsburgh when Johnny was coaching in Wilkes-Barre, and it was Ray Shero that hired John Hynes to coach the New Jersey Devils. Ray Shero now is a special assistant to Billy Guerin. So the sense of familiarity, bringing in somebody that you know, somebody that really understands the players, and I think they have a lot of confidence. Now, that's not a knock on Dean Evason, by the way, Jimmy. Really important to stress that.
Yeah. Last
night, if you watch their game with St. Louis, a couple minor tweaks. First of all, their penalty kill, which was worst in the league, was 4 for 4 last night on the penalty kill against St. Louis. Their power play, which was 25th in the league going into the game, they didn't score on the power play, but they generated chances. They only had one opportunity, but they generated chances. But the thing to me is you could see they were playing with a little more pace. I think it's a team that sensed they needed more pace, and they're playing with more pace, at least after one game.
Yeah, and look, obviously, Pierre, too, every time a team gets a new coach behind the bench, that first game, they get the bump, right? Maybe even it lasts for a few games. So we'll really see the influence he's having, I'd say more towards the 5, 6 game, 7 stretch. But yeah, they did have the penalty kill was better. But I look back at John Hynes too, Pierre, and I look at his time in New Jersey. And I think you might have touched on this the other day with Mitch Melnick, actually. And just, you know, they were a team in transition when he was there. They were bringing up a lot of young kids. And I felt like maybe around the NHL, he didn't get enough credit for the job he did with the development of those kids that are now pivotal players for the New Jersey Devils. So maybe if you could just elaborate on that a little more.
Well, I think that's a great point. And one of the guys that was there and was helping him was Ray Shero, obviously. Ray Shero put a lot of those young players into place. So did Tommy Fitzgerald. So, you know, you look at it, there's a lot of carryover there with this. But yes, the development of a lot of the young players in New Jersey can be directly tied to John Hynes and his coaching staff at the time. Alain Nasreddine was one of those guys who did a great job with their young defensemen. But I would agree with that 100%. And that's one of the things, Jimmy, we've talked about it a lot. And I think Scotty Bowman would agree to this. The truth is, the number one thing now for a lot of these staffs, because they're up against the cap, you got to develop players at the NHL level because you're rushing a lot of guys to the NHL. And if you don't have a coaching staff that can develop players at the NHL level, you're not going to be very successful.
On that note, then, who's a player that you think maybe the new staff under Hynes focuses in on? That's a young player that maybe was rushed a bit, but he has a chance to make his imprint on the team now.
Brock Faber. And I watched him last night, and I thought he was outstanding in the game, played over 25 minutes in the game. I think we'll see his ice time go up as they get more and more comfortable with him. So he's one. Now, remember, Brock was a University of Minnesota guy, drafted in the first round by the LA Kings, comes over in a trade a couple summers ago, and it looks like he's going to be a real good player for them. I thought Jonas Brodin, who's an established player, was fantastic last night in that game for Minnesota. So the young player, the one that I expect is really going to evolve for Minnesota, I think will be Brock Faber.
Yeah, I'd agree too. And Pierre, let's switch gears now. Another thing that we have been talking about over the past couple of weeks is Patrick Kane, but more specifically, we've been really high in the Red Wings. We've been watching this team start to bring it together, and now they finally do sign Patrick Kane. And I got to give credit to you, Pierre, not just doing this because you're my friend and my co-host here, but, back in September 28th, because I wrote about it on Boston Hockey Now, I remember you were one of the first people to link the Red Wings to Patrick Kane. And a lot of people said, the Red Wings? What are you talking about? But why did you think that it was a good chance that he would sign up there?
One, because they're an enlightened organization. Two, because Steve Yzerman respects skill. Three, because they spent a lot of collateral to go out and get Alex DeBrincat. If you look at Patrick Kane's best years in Chicago, I know everybody equates it to him and Jonathan Toews, but really his best offensive year was probably with Alex DeBrincat. So there's a tie in there. And I think the biggest thing is Detroit is tired of not having won playoff series. They haven't won a playoff series since 2013, and they haven't been in the playoffs for the last 7 years. I think with Patrick Kane, it's one of those where it puts them over the top in terms of a playoff position. At least I think it will, as long as they can stay healthy. And to me, if you look at it, when Patrick Kane, before he went to play for the London Knights, he lived at Pat Verbeek's house in Detroit. He played before the London Knights in Detroit. So I think he's very comfortable in the city of Detroit. And quite frankly, I think it's really a great fit. And I think Patrick will do well there. I think the Red Wings will do well there. But I like the enlightened managerial style of Steve Yzerman and his staff there. I think they did a magnificent job, Jimmy.
Well, one of the things we were talking about off air, Pierre, and I was saying, well, I'm still worried about that blue line. And you made a great point. They've got something coming that could really help that blue line. It may not be till later in the season, but they've got a guy coming that could really change things around on the blue line, don't they?
Yeah, Simon Edvinsson is about a 6'4", 205-pound defenseman that plays for Grand Rapids. He's their third leading scorer right now. It's not all about points with this player. I watched him a ton over in Sweden playing for Frölunda. He's athletic. He's extremely quick. He's so smooth. He moves the puck fantastically well. He can be on your power play. He can be on your penalty kill. He can play in a shutdown role. He's one of those guys that I know Detroit likes to keep their guys marinating down in the American Hockey League, Jimmy. And it's a great line from the former general manager there, Kenny Holland. He'd rather have players be overripe than underdeveloped. And I think that's probably part of the thing with Simon Edvinsson right now. He played 9 games in the NHL last year. I think you're going to see as the season goes along, he'll get more. But let's not forget, they went out and got Jeff Petrie. He's a proven player. They got Ben Sherratt. He's a big physical guy. They've got Jake Wallman. He's a guy that won a national championship at Providence College as a leader. So they've got some pieces in place in defense that I think obviously is tremendous. And we all do not talk enough about Moritz Seider. We just don't talk about him enough.
It's crazy. He's just one of the silent stars, I like to call it, in the NHL. I'm with you, Pierre. And he's such a dynamic player. I love watching between the pipes too, Pierre. I mean, look, I kind of look – my take from afar is that maybe Yzerman, looking at the goaltending situation, it's probably is this team, and I'm talking not this season, but I'm talking years down the line, that their guy isn't there yet. But he's done some great scouting, bringing in guys that can fill the gap. And one of the guys that, we talk about the Florida Panthers and the run they went on in the playoffs last year. And yeah, Bobrovsky was the man for that run, basically. But they didn't get to the playoffs with Bobrovsky between the pipes, did they? And that guy now is in Detroit.
Yeah, Alex Lyon, that's a great point. The former goaltender from Yale University where he played for Keith Elaine. Alex Lyon's done some good work for Detroit too recently, Jimmy, as you know. Yep. Detroit's won 3 games in a row. And I don't think people are talking enough about where they are in the standings. If the playoffs started today, the Detroit Red Wings would be in the playoffs. Now, I know we got a long way to go. I get it. But don't think Patrick Kane's not going to help them. And again, we talk about enlightened management style by Steve Yzerman and his scouts. I look at getting JT Compher. I look at a year ago getting Kopp, and out of Winnipeg. And so you'll start to look at it, David Perron. You start to look at the guys that they've added as a managerial team. They deserve a lot of credit there in Detroit. And they're amateur players. They got a ton coming. That's on Chris Draper, who's done a fantastic job as a director of scouting. Detroit is one of the teams. Everybody talks about Buffalo and everybody talks about Ottawa, and they should. Those are good up-and-coming teams. Detroit is right in there and maybe ahead of them, quite frankly.
Yeah, I'm with you too. And you look at it seems to me, Pierre, is the blueprint that Stevie's using there is very similar to what he did in Tampa Bay. Draft well.
Mm-hmm.
And then you just mentioned, I love that you brought up those guys like an Andrew Kopp, targeted signings, not like, big splash type signings, targeted signings that fill a specific need and then will help as time goes on and blend in with the younger guys.
So think about it. Their best players, Dylan Larkin, University of Michigan, Michigan guy. JT Comfort, University of Michigan, Michigan guy. Kopp, Michigan. So, they understand. They've done their research. They've done their fact finding. There's a reason why they go out and identify and get players. Now, I know the one guy that breaks the mold is Petrie. He's Michigan State. It's okay. He's still a Michigan guy. So you look at it. There's a lot to like there. And I respect people that do their due diligence. It's a big part of the eye test, Jimmy. And in Detroit, they're passing with flying colors. They really are.
And one guy, just because I know him, I got to give him props because I do think he had some of the development. Gets some of the development credit here is my friend Ryan Martin. I thought he did a great job when he was in Detroit. Of course, he's on with the Rangers, who the Red Wings will play tonight. And by the way, for everyone out there, I just heard it confirmed. Adam Fox back in the lineup for the New York Rangers. That's a huge get for them to have back in there. But before, we get to Scotty Bowman here, why don't we talk about the coach of the Detroit Red Wings, Pierre, and Derek Lalonde? I didn't know a lot about him, just that he was an assistant in Tampa. But, as he's gotten Detroit, as I've told everyone here, I love Detroit Red Wings when I was growing up. I still follow them. I've been really impressed with him. Like, I didn't understand how well he does with the young kids. And I've noticed it. I read up on it a lot. I'm really impressed with Derek Lalonde, Pierre.
Well, first of all, the power play is a big part of what he does, and he's done a real good job with it. He's a tactician, and I really like that. He's got some energy and passion behind the bench at the appropriate time. I really admire that. I think he learned a lot down in Tampa. Obviously, you go to 3 straight Stanley Cup final with the Tampa Bay Lightning. You win 2 out of 3. That's pretty heady stuff. And so Derek gets his opportunity after the 3rd Stanley Cup where they didn't win in Colorado. But that being said, to go to 3 straight, that's very impressive. And you learn, I can speak to it. And our next guest, obviously, was Scotty Bowman. He's been through it so many times. He won 14 cups. Think about it, 9 as a coach and 5 as an executive. But I can tell you this right now. We went to back-to-back cups in 91 and 92 in Pittsburgh. And every time you go through the chase to win the cup, you learn so much about coaching. You learn so much about managing people. You learn so much about the game. And everybody says, oh, the Stanley Cup this and the Stanley Cup that. Until you've been through it, you know nothing about it. You know nothing about it. You can think you know, but until you've been there, you know nothing about it.
Let me ask you this, Pierre, on that note. You went through 2 that. Was it tougher the second time around because everybody is gunning for you and you got that bullseye on your back?
It was a little bit more difficult, but one of the things that really helped us is we had the luxury of having a head coach that never panicked. And with Scotty Bowman, we were down. People forget this. We were down 3-1 to the Washington Capitals in the first round.
Yep.
We were an aggressive 2-1-2 forechecking team. They were killing us with their offensive defensemen in Washington. They were jumping Calle Johansson and Sylvain Cote and Ali Afridi and Kevin Hatcher into the rush all the time. Mm-hmm. And they were just blowing by us, and they were killing us.
Yeah.
And Scotty said, we got to change. And to change in the middle of a series and to make it work because we had no wiggle room. We were down 3-1. We were going into Game 5 in Washington. We had to win Game 5 just to prolong the series. We changed our neutral zone. We changed our forecheck. We changed our matchups. And that was it. But that because our head coach was calm, cool, and collected and had been through it before, Jimmy. It's a huge thing. It really is. And, I remember Terry Murray, the former coach of the Washington Capitals, looking at our bench once going, I'm almost like ready to give up. Scotty was just masterminding everything.
What the heck just happened, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And, of course, you're there front row for it, Pierre. Well, you and Scotty were both front row for this, and that whole comeback led to this moment. So let's go right now to 1992, Game 4 in Chicago at the old stadium there. Let's check it out.
Left side of the net, 3 seconds. Pittsburgh has indeed won back-to-back Stanley
Well, I bet that brings back some memories, huh?
That's some really good memories. Obviously, Chicago Stadium in particular, what an amazing place for hockey and what an amazing place for fans to watch. But what I loved about what you just showed, Jimmy, that embrace between Mike Keenan and Scotty Bowman. If it weren't for Scotty, Mike probably would have been a little bit longer in terms of getting an opportunity. It was Scotty that hired him to coach the Rochester Americans back in the early 1980s when Scotty was running the Buffalo Sabres. Rochester back then, and still is, their farm team. But it was Scotty that gave Mike Keenan an opportunity to coach at the professional level. And obviously Mike did a great job. He took that team to a Calder Cup championship in Rochester, and then the Philadelphia Flyers hired him. But, you know, I see that picture, and on the Chicago bench, it was Daryl Sutter and Mike, and in our bench, it was Rick Keogh, myself, and Scotty. And, you know, think about it now, that's a lot of years ago, but there was some pretty significant brain power.
I hear you. Well, speaking of, let's bring on the architect of it all right now, Scotty Bowman, joining us here on the eye test. Pierre McGuire and Jimmy Murphy. Scotty, how are you?
Good. I hope you can see me, but it's a little dark. But
no, you look great. You look great.
Yeah.
Perfect. Pierre, I'll let you start it off here.
Scotty, I got it. Let's just start off. Thank you so much for joining us. It really means a lot, and you look fantastic. Last time I saw Scotty, full disclosure, was at the Hockey Hall of Fame, and Scotty, you were holding court right there in the Westin. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, it was a good trip. I haven't gone up as much as I should, but with Mike Vernon and Tommy Barrasso going in, I got a nice invitation. So I was happy to go to see them. I mean, they meant a lot to our teams, both in Detroit and Tommy in Buffalo and then in Pittsburgh.
Scotty, can you take us through the drafting of Tommy Barrasso? I don't think you get enough credit for that and the vision you had to have as an organization in Buffalo to draft a player out of Acton Boxborough High School and see him come into the NHL and flourish as an 18-year-old goalie.
Well, all the credit really should go to the late Bucky Kane was his name. He was a part-time scout with Buffalo, actually with the Boston first. And then when Punch Imlach, you know, he had a connection with Boston because he was with Springfield when they were a farm team. He went to Buffalo after a long, successful career with Toronto. And when I got to Buffalo in '79, Bucky Kane was on board as a scout around the Boston area. And we took him on, and then I liked him so much that he went in Ontario and Quebec for juniors. And the year before we drafted Tommy, Bucky started on all the scouts, and he was pretty vocal, and he said, "There's a goalie here that can shoot a puck harder than some of your NHL players, and he's only 17." And they went on, and the funny part was after we investigated everything, and I went to see him a couple of times, and no reflection. I mean, his backup goalie. Now we're talking 1983. Or 80, I guess, yeah, he was drafted in 83, so it's 82, 83 season. His backup goalie was a girl who didn't play much. I mean, we're talking like how many years? That's 20, 40, that's nearly 40 years ago. But anyways, Bucky was the reason. Bucky Kane, a man that was a custodian at a school from Mattapan in Mass. Wonderful man, passed away very early after I left Buffalo, and we became very good friends. But he said, this goalie's 6'3". He's got an edge to him. He can shoot a puck. He said he's going to save your defense a lot of heartaches, and everything came through. And I give Bucky Kane the real reason why we drafted him. I mean, he was an early pick. We drafted, I think he was 5th pick. I'm not sure, but because Phil Housley was drafted the year before at number 6, and he was a high school player, and that was another scout we had. We had good scouts. Rudy Miguel, the late Rudy Miguel, he was a wonderful scout, and he spotted Phil. I went up to watch Phil play, but that's how we got Bucky Kane.
Scotty, you talk about all those great legends. Don't forget your brother Jack as well, who was on the staff. Your late brother Jack, who did such a good job for the Sabres for so many years. Scotty, can you talk about when you got hired away by from the Montreal Canadiens to the St. Louis Blues by Lynn Patrick, and how much that helped change maybe your career?
Well, I was kind of fortunate, Pierre, because I had played junior hockey, and I was not thinking at the time that being an NHL coach, but I was pretty devastated. I got a bad injury, and I got a job with a paint company, and I was very fortunate because my boss allowed me to take long lunch hours, and I coached the junior B team. Well, actually, I coached outdoor hockey first for a year or two in my hometown in Verdun, and then I got a chance to coach an independent junior B team in a junior B league in Montreal. We had a pretty good season. We had older players, and we went to the finals and got beat. And then I got an offer to go to Ottawa with the junior Canadians. They moved to Ottawa, and the late Sam Pollock was the coach when I got injured. Give me an opportunity, and I left the paint company. And you're right, I was kind of fortunate. And then I coached around junior for the first 2 years with Hull Ottawa. Ottawa Canadians the first year, and then Hull. Then I went to Peterborough for 3 years. And in those days, Pierre, every summer they call you in and tell you what you're going to do. And I had coached, assistant coach 1 year, and then a full-time coach, head coach for 4 years. And they said, our head scout for Eastern Canada has gone to the Rangers, the late Luke Passador. He was a wonderful man, good friend of mine. And they said, now you're going to be the head scout. I said, well, I like to coach. They know you're going to be the scout. So I went scouting for, oh my goodness, 60. We're talking now, like I finished Peterborough 61. I went on a scout, I guess 3 years I was scouting before I got a chance to go back coaching. And I had the chance during those 3 years to see, I think it would be 13 years old. He might have just turned, his birthday was in March, Bobby Orr. I saw Bobby play and that was another story because the Boston Bruins were already on Bobby. I give all the credit to Lynn Patrick or to Ren Blair, and they were on top of it. And they had a heads up with everybody, but Ren Blair was their director of scouting, and he knew him. Everybody knew him, but they were ahead of the game. And I went to see two other players. I hadn't seen them play. But I had a chance to see him play because he was playing for Parry Sound, and they go by population in Ontario, and they were in the C division because they don't have a lot of people there, and they played the team in Ontario, and we were all looking at two players in Ontario. So quite a story because I was living with a bunch of football players in a rooming house in Ottawa. I was hardly there because I was scouting, and the guy that owned the house was a big football fan. And so I liked him, and I said, it was in March. I said, you want to come for a nice drive? It's an hour and a half. I said, I'm going to watch two good players on one team, and the other one's probably gone. So he didn't know anything about hockey. After 5 minutes, after I gave him the two guys, I said, watch number 8 and number 17. And then after about 5 minutes, he said, you can forget about those two. That little guy, number 2. And Bobby was about 5'4". And he hadn't had his growth spurt yet. And within 2 years, he went to Oshawa, of course, Boston, with the rest is history.
Scotty, you talked about Sam Pollock before. How much did Sam Pollock influence your career, and what made Sam so great?
Well, Sam was always prepared. He had a business side to the hockey side, and he trusted people that worked for him. I think the biggest asset he had is he wasn't a one-man gang, and he naturally made the final choices all the time. But he was a workaholic on hockey. He's also in the business side. So I think the reason that the Canadians were so successful is he started in 1947. He worked about 17 years before he became the general manager. And then when he became the general manager, he knew all the minor league. He also had a bit of an edge on a lot of teams. When the league expanded in '67, he was able to get to a lot of the governors' meetings, and he got to know a lot of the owners. And in those days, the expansion teams didn't get a lot of NHL players, and we didn't get a lot of draft choices. And he was able to make trades with owners. I mean, the West Division were getting impatient because, we weren't as good as the East for sure, but we were together. That was with the vision of the president, Clarence Campbell. And I don't know if people know, the reason the NHL expanded is there was a very strong league in Western Canada. It was led by a very smart gentleman, Al Leader. It's called the Western Hockey League. And he kept going into Montreal and visiting with Clarence Campbell and saying, we want to be the Western arm of the NHL. This would be around probably 63, 64. But the NHL was starting to flourish because Chicago had come out of the doldrums. They got Hull and Makita. They won the cup in 61. The league was doing well, and they didn't want to really expand, and they didn't want to have this Western League. And then maybe a year later, the Western League said, "Well, we're gonna start our own pro league." So the people that ran the NHL got in a hurry, said, "Look, hang with this. I mean, we're not going to have a competitor." I mean, they did get one later, 5 years later, but the Western Division, that was the late Clarence Campbell, the president. He had a vision. He said, "Well, we're not going to give up." Sam Pollock was looking after the way the draft was going to work, and the other owners were happy that he wasn't going to give much away. So, we all survived, but we only got about, I think in the draft, I'm pretty sure we got about 3 or 4 NHL players because the teams are allowed to protect. I think it was like 12 players, and the 13th player was available on each team, and then they would pull back number 14. So we only got 3 NHL players, 3 or 4, but we were competitive among each other. And I've always said it's one of the most astounding things in hockey that the Philadelphia Flyers started with the rest of the teams in 1967. And can you imagine, in 7 years, they were able to win a Stanley Cup? It was an amazing accomplishment by the entire Philadelphia organization.
Well, I want to go down that road. I'm glad you brought up the Philadelphia Flyers, Scotty. Your first cup in Montreal as a head coach was in 1973. But in 1976, you played the Philadelphia Flyers in the final. That was their 3rd trip to the final. They had won the previous 2 years. That was considered maybe the changing of the guard because the Broad Street Bullies, after that, ceased to exist in the eyes of a lot of people. And one of the real moments in that series was Larry Robinson fighting Dave Schultz and getting the better of him. How much of that do you remember, Scotty?
Well, I do remember a lot about Philadelphia because they were starting to really develop their team about 1972, 73, and they were playing a different style. They were a tough team. Bobby Clark was a great player. They had Rick McClish. They were really skilled players, but they surrounded them with a lot of really hard-working players that came in the late drafts or minor leagues. So when I remember one time we would play training camp games, and we were starting to come along in Montreal because we got Lafleur in 71 and Robinson in 71, and then we had a good nucleus, and then we got Steve Shutt in 72, Bob Gainey in 73. And so by the time we were ready to play against Philadelphia, we used to play them preseason games, and they were just battles. And then my assistant at the time, Claude Ruel, we'd have all our players in Montreal. We'd play a home and home, and they would come with all their tough guys. And remember, Claude said to me one night after one of the, we played them every year. Sam Pollock would, because we could both draw people. And he said, "Well, I don't know why we play these guys. We play them enough during the season. All they want to do is fight." And so he said, we put our good players on the ice in Philadelphia or in Montreal. Then we go to Philadelphia and we took a bunch of tough players. We had a lot of guys in the minors. Oh my God, the names: Glenn Goldup and Jules Lupien, and we had another guy named Sean.
Rick Charchar.
Oh yeah, that was a little bit later.
Okay.
So we went to Philadelphia and we had a big brawl one night, and we had tough guys that weren't going to play on our NHL team, and from that point on, we had good respect. They respected that we could play that kind of hockey. But when we played them in 76, I think it was because the Flyers had won 2 years in a row, but our young guys were really developing. The Canada Cup in 76 was played in the fall, and I think the reason we did well there is because we had won the Stanley Cup in the spring, and we had every kind of player we had tough players, we had skilled players, we had Hall of Fame players. I mean, that was all because of the way they built the team. So Philadelphia, yes, it was a tight series, and Larry Robinson was equivocally one of the toughest fighters of any team I ever was connected with. But we didn't want him fighting, of course, and he put a big body check on Gary Dornhofer. You're right, and that seemed to change the tempo of the series, so we could just play hockey. And in the finals, it's a lot more difficult for the tough teams to play their style because the penalty can be costly. I know they had a good break. Knocking off Boston in the year in the first Buffalo first in 74, and then Boston, and that was a big upset. But I don't have all the facts in that series because I wasn't in it.
Scotty, I love the fact that you're talking about Larry Robinson. Jimmy, you got to hear this. That hit on Gary Dornhofer, it broke the boards in the Forum. That hit actually broke the boards in the Forum. Wow. And I think Larry got a penalty for boarding on that play, if I remember correctly, Scotty.
Literally.
No, it's amazing.
Probably in those days, it's probably a 2-minute minor.
It was.
and no video review or nothing. But yeah, Larry, we didn't, he got tested at the odd time. He got in a big fight in that series too, but he was so big. Larry could defend himself. And he, I don't think he really enjoyed fighting, but he's one of those players that when you do line up against him, he had the big edge, his size, and we were always concerned that he was going to get in a fight, and with some player that didn't play much but could really fight and get injured or something. I was always after him. We don't want you fighting players, that aren't really players like yourself. But so that's what I think happened.
Jimmy, I got to go down this road. This is really important for Scotty. One of the most memorable goals in Scotty's tenure with the Montreal Canadiens was in 1979 in the Game 7 semifinal against the Boston Bruins. And he gets the puck. It's one of the best calls ever from the late Danny Gallivan. Scotty, can you take us through what set up that power play opportunity for the Montreal Canadiens and how much went into it in terms of coaching brain power and adjustments?
Well, we had a big 3 years in a row with when Don Cherry was coaching the Bruins. And like you mentioned, we beat Philly 4 straight in 76. Then we ran into the Bruins, and they were really coming along. We were pretty fortunate, all the teams that played Boston after Bobby Orr couldn't play anymore. But so what happened is we beat Boston 4 straight. We won the cup in Boston, I think, and we were a shade ahead of them for sure. The next year it went 6 games, and that would be in 78, and that was a tight series. A couple of them went into overtime, and they were coming close. And then in 79 they were even better, and that series was not the Stanley Cup final, but it was the conference final. And went into this 7. We had the advantage of the 7th game, but there was a lot of strange goals in that game. And then we lost Guy Lapointe in the 3rd period. He hurt his groin. He couldn't come back. And as you know, in those days, we didn't, same as every team in the league, if you had a guy, even like Bobby Orr would play 40 minutes a game, we weren't playing 3 pairs of defensemen, and nobody was. So anyways, we got into a real problem. I think it was Rick Middleton scored a strange goal. He was behind the net, and he put it off of Ken Dryden's pad, and it went in to give him the lead at the time. And there was only maybe 5 minutes left, but they got a penalty. We started to double shift because one of the better shadows that I ever had to coach against was Donald Marcotte. He was a great player for Boston. He could knock out any right winger. Like, there were some good ones, great ones, Mike Bossy, Guy Lafleur. It was tough to play against Don because he was really like a Bob Gainey type. And there was no room. When he went on the ice, he knew his job. Well, we started double shifting Guy. And I don't know the confusion on the Boston bench. I don't think it was Don, but 2 people, like Guy went out there, and I think they had a good system that he was going to play every shift against Guy Lafleur. So we double shifted Guy Lafleur, and somehow it was a mix-up. And he went on, and I don't even know the other player for Boston that went on. They were on for maybe 20, 30 seconds, and John D'Amico, in history, one of the great linesmen of all time, he was a bit slow. I think it was a crucial time in the game when you're talking the last 2 minutes of a game. And finally, they played with 6 players, 6 Gators, gave them the bench penalty, and then that was the famous goal that they show. I mean, the most famous goal is Bobby Orr's goal. I was on the other bench on that one.
Yeah, Mother's Day.
I was on the right bench, but no, it was a great play. Larry Robinson gave it to Lafleur, and I still see it like they show that goal quite a bit. It's real close to an offside because Jacques Lemaire got the puck right at the Boston blue line, and I'm not sure. I mean, we can't slow it down or anything now, and you can't. It doesn't matter. But he dropped it back, and it was a perfect shot along the ice, right in the corner. Guy had done that on a few occasions, and that tied the game. And then it's a strange part of the game. Like Guy Lapointe had gone, and Claude Drouel was a wonderful man, and he wasn't on the bench though. He always sat upstairs, and he came down before the overtime. And we were such a great friends, and in his broken, he always spoke English, and I tried to speak a little French, and he said to me in the room, "What we do now," because we knew how much we played those 3 defensemen. I said, "Claude, we got to play Larry and Serge. I'm going to start them in the overtime, and I'm going to make sure that one is on the ice all the time." Oh, he said, "But we can't start them." I said, "No, one's going to have to stay on."
Yeah.
I mean, I said, "Serge will stay on. He doesn't rush a lot." And he said, "Yeah, but there's going to be." I said, "We have to gamble. If we don't win in 10 minutes, we're going to get maybe tired. But I don't want to lose trying to win a 4th cup I want to lose with my best guys. If they're tired or not, that's the way it is." So we were so fortunate because we did score a goal right about 10 minutes, Lambert, because they had some chances too, and not a lot. It was a tight 10-minute overtime, but Boston was the closest they came. But being swept, then going 6 games, and now having us on the ropes. I mean, and I know Don Cherry gets criticized a lot for having too many men on the ice, but Pierre, you coached. I've coached a long time. Most of the times, the players know who's supposed to go on, but somebody else jumps on.
Yep.
Jimmy, by the way, Scotty talked about that goal by Yvon Lambert. What a play by young Mario Tremblay, going wide around the Boston defense, cross crease pass. Scotty, people forget this about Mario Tremblay, one of the first 18-year-old players that ever played for the Montreal Canadiens. I mean, he was a tough guy, and he was a good player, and that was a key moment in that series when he made that cross crease feed to Yvon Lambert.
Well, we had good teams prior, but I think what we did, with Canadians had players a lot coming up, but our team changed one year. I'm not sure the exact year. It might have been 74 or 75, but Doug Risebrough and Mario Tremblay were drafted in the same draft, and they went and played it with our team in Halifax. And, we started off the season, and I thought we were really skilled players, but we were getting pushed around a little bit. And when they came up, and we put them with Yvon Lambert, and I keep telling people the most important players on some teams, and it was like us in Montreal, is your role players. I mean, they mean so much to a team, and even now they're talking in the NHL. It's hard to get a lot of good players on the team now with all the rules and cap. But if you get an edge on the bottom 6, that's what we did. We had Mario, and we had Doug Risebrough and Lambert, and later on when I got to Detroit, I mean, these players don't get credit. I had Draper, Maltby, and McCarty, and then Koster came along, and those jobs are so hard. They don't get the money of the top 6. They get 11, 12, 13 minutes. And Pierre, they're so important to a team. And I always look at those players and say, what a job. They have to accept their role. I mean, if they, I guess a lot of guys are tried in that role and say, I want to play more and I want to get more money now. So that's why it's hard to keep on your team together. But I give a lot of credit to all the good teams when they. I go to all the Lightning games. I've been going here since I got here in '05, and I've seen this team develop. And I mean, in their cup runs, they had 3 or 4, but the 2 cup wins. Those extra players, they're still around now. They're Goodrow and Yanni Gord. Now they've lost Palat and they've lost Killorn. They're still going because they have Hall of Fame players, and they're going to be close again. But boy, those extra players that know their role, to me, they're so important.
Jimmy, you got to have some questions for the legendary Coach Bowman.
I do, and that was a great segue because, Pierre, we were talking off air how much I love the Red Wings, and those. That's when I fell in love with them, was when Scotty took over there. And Scotty, I want to go back to then. You guys, and Pierre has mentioned this on our podcast recently. When you guys lose to, I believe it was San Jose, right, in '94.
Oh yeah,
and
that was the game.
You sat with Stevie Y, and then you also you kind of changed the philosophy of the team. And you bring up just now, I think it's great that you brought that up, how important bottom 6 guys are and how important a two-way game is. So take us back to sort of that transformation that team made before they became a dynasty and won those 3 cups.
Could score goals. When I was in Detroit, I was in Pittsburgh, and then I didn't know a lot about the Red Wings because we're in different divisions, different conference. But when I got there, the team always was shut down in the playoffs. That's the problem with them, and they could score goals. They had a lot of the same type of players, good goal scorers. Get in the playoffs, they dry up a little bit, and when you start with players, you've got to get players that are not just offensive players, and we were fortunate. We were able to make some changes, and we made some tough trades. It doesn't happen that easy. We had a good defenseman, Steve Chason. We brought Mike Vernon, of course, and he just got in the Hall of Fame. But then what really changed our team around is we traded a really good scorer, Ray Shepard, and we got Igor Larionov. That was probably we had no idea we were going to have a Russian 5 at that time, although he was the last piece we got. We didn't make the trade. We made the trade because he single-handedly beat us in '93. He was in San Jose. They didn't have a Russian 5, but boy, they had Yarpenlov and they had Makarov and they had Norton on defense and Ozolinch. They played keep away, and he came, and that was what happened. But our checkers really meant a lot to our team. They could kill penalties, but I always admired those players because and I think even last year, I know Jimmy a lot, Jimmy Montgomery, and they, when you think about the Bruins, they did have the top lines, but they had role players that meant a lot. And now, of course, those role players have accelerated into more premier players. You look at what happens to players when they start slowly. And the one player in Boston that I keep watching, and I saw him play down here a couple of weeks ago, and I don't remember him too much when he started, but Charlie Coyle. He's become a pretty. He's self-improved with the coaching giving him a chance. Now he's come to his limelight. But those extra players, I take my hat off to them.
Yeah, and you had, I think of Mike Knuble was great for you guys in some of those runs there in Detroit, a guy like that. You brought up the Russian 5 there, okay? And Scotty, obviously you've been a man that's learned so much about the game as you've gone along, as you were just discussing, and then applying it. When you have them on the team there, and you mentioned puck possession just now, what was it like as a coach adapting to the players and then them adapting to you when you had that skill right there?
I was always, with the time we put nobody, I think, I'm not sure if it was Slav. I think it was more Slava Fetisov, but because he was the one that bugged us to get Larionov. He said he wants to come, but he was always coming to me and asking me, if you see something. I said no. I said, Slava, I don't know what you're doing. I said I can't help you. He's the kid with me, but I was always afraid when I put them together the first time. It's an amazing game. I do remember a lot about it. We played in Calgary. The other team had 12 shots in the game. Wow. And I played them so much because they were so different. It was a new toy. And I couldn't believe I did not believe what I could see. I did play against Russians and lost a lot of times to them in national games, but these guys were unbelievable. But I was always leery of playing them regularly for two reasons. One, I didn't want the other teams to maybe try to catch on because I was going to use them in the playoffs. Right. And the other one was the culture of the team. We had some really good Hall of Fame American-born players, Canadian-born players, and when you're running a team, you don't want to have players take over the team. I mean, they weren't going to do it, but I had to sort of juggle a little bit, and I didn't play them all the time, and that's the reason I didn't play them. Maybe I should have, but they didn't complain. They were happy in there. I mean, they were veterans like Sergei Fedorov. He'd been there right from the beginning, and Slava Kozlov came. Konstantinov and Fedorov came around the same time.
That's great. Here,
Jimmy, I was just going to ask Scotty about one of his experiments in Detroit was putting Sergei Fedorov on defense. He wanted him to get more ice time. Scotty, can you tell us how that experiment worked out?
Yeah, Sergei's dad was a coach, Victor, the late Victor, and he really he pushed his son a lot. And it's funny, like when they first started putting ice time and they bring the sheets in, like Victor would get one, and if he didn't get 20 minutes, he was down, and he would, and then he would tell Sergei, "You got to play more." So it was so bad that when the guy brought the sheets in, I used to grab them all. So none of the first, it worked for about a month. I didn't want any of it, but anyways, because they weren't as accurate as I thought they were, because we had a guy doing our own. So anyways. We got two bad injuries on defense that were going to last for 5 or 6 weeks, and he was so good a skater, forwards and backwards. In fact, later on, I remember talking to Wayne Gretzky about, and he's a big admirer of Sergei, and he told me something and he makes a lot of sense. And he said, Scotty, I could never even attempt to play defense. Neither could Mario. Neither could Yager. He said, it's amazing that this guy could play. I said, well, he's a good back skater. He said, yeah, but, and I guess when it goes back, when he first came over from Russia, I wasn't there. Brian Murray and those they used him as a defensive center. He was an unusual Russian player that in his youth, like 19, 20, 21, he was so good defensively. But he wasn't as good offensively, but he developed so quick. So, I mean, I said, Sergei, would you like to try defense? And I wasn't, I put him with Nick Lidstrom first to see, how is he going to be? Well, after 1 or 2 games, I said, he's going to have his own partner, and he liked it, but he still liked to play center. And our defense came back, but I think that Sergei Fedorov could have been imagine in today's game, the way that the game has changed so much, that he could take that puck and take off. He was such a strong skater, and that's why I put him on defense, because we had these, and we also I wanted to try to make sure that he gets extra, because we had good centermen. We had Sergei and Steve Yzerman, and we had Chris Draper and Igor Larionov. There's only so much. There's only 60 minutes in the game.
Jimmy, I got to tell you this story, and I'm so happy that Scotty's here. Scotty, we won't take up too much more of your time. Jimmy, in 2002, Scotty coached his last playoff game. It was his 223rd playoff victory, Game 5 versus Carolina. The night before the game, I'm sitting in my hotel room, and the phone rings, and it's Scott. And he says, "What are you doing?" I said, "Nothing. I'm just getting my notes ready for tomorrow." He goes, "I'll pick you up at the hotel in about 10 minutes. So we get in the car, we drive. I go, "Where are we going?" He goes, "Just button up. Let me talk." So we start driving, and we're going north of the city of Detroit. And I go, "I've never been here before." And we end up at this beautiful place called the Grosse Pointe Yacht Club. And we pull in, and there's this gentleman that comes out with a huge hat. And it turns out he's the Commodore of the club. And Scotty says, "I brought you here for a reason." And we go upstairs. We're escorted to a private room. I'll never forget this night as long as I live. And he says, I'm going to tell you something in this room, but you can't tell anybody else. So I was sitting on this secret, and he says, when we win tomorrow, and he wasn't even thinking loss. He says, when we win tomorrow, I'm retiring, I'm putting my skates on, and I'm going to skate around Joe Louis, just like the players do at the Cup. It's going to be my last game. Scotty, I will never forget that night as long as I live. And my one question to you is, how were you so darn sure you were going to win?
No, I decided, but really, Pierre, my mind was made up. We had an Olympic break, and we went down to it's a long one too, 10 days, and we had a mini training camp in Orlando, and when you're coaching and you're working in the NHL, your family, it's important, but your wife has to take over. So my kids were now maybe in high school, so we took them all. The four of them, we had a great visit for about 5-6 days. Then we had our 5-day training camp. And at that time is when I said, eventually you're going to have to leave. I was just turning 70. And I said, I've had a nice career. I said, I would like to, my hero was always Toe Blake. And I said, the thing I always admired about Toe is he left and won his last game. And I said, I'd like to be a coach that wins my last game. Most coaches lose their last game and get booted out. So that's why I did it. But I didn't even tell my wife. I just said, I'm thinking of leaving, but I'm not sure. But I mean, I wanted to put pressure on myself that we got to win this game, or otherwise I'm going to have to coach another year. But I didn't want to have a parade around the league, and I didn't want anybody to, I just felt it was not the way to go out. I just wanted to do my job and leave. And then I said I couldn't play and I couldn't put skates on. So I had the trainer. I said, well, actually, I had him primed up, Paul Boyer. I said, if it gets down to the last minute, and I said, we're close, I want my skates ready. And he had them beside the bench, like that because we were playing against Carolina. Mm-hmm. And we had a 2, but they were pretty tight games. We had 2-1 lead, and then when Brendan Shanahan scored the empty net, I said, "Okay, I'm going to start lacing up." That's why when it was over, I had them ready.
It's so funny you bring this up here because in researching for this interview earlier today, I came across, and I don't know if you remember it, Scotty. I think it was CTV. Did a profile when Ken Dryden wrote the book on you, and they're pumping up the release of that book, and they were interviewing Chris Chelios, and he brought that exact thing up, and Pierre and I didn't plan this. That's so weird. And Chris was like, yeah, and Scotty's skating around, and we had no idea he was going to do this, and he's saying it's the last game, and we thought he was just joking us, but it was. So it's interesting you brought that up.
Yeah, I know, Jimmy, that you are a good Bostonian, and I have my daughter that lives there now with 2 boys. And what I've always thought, it's amazing how things go back and forth. But when I was growing up in Montreal, I was 6 years old. Yeah, it's when they won their 2 cups in 1930. Is it 39 and 41? I think they won the 2 cups, and I was 6 years old. My dad would let me listen to the radio. There was an announcer in Boston called Frank Ryan, and we had such a signal in Montreal. I would listen to the first period of the game. I don't know how I got hooked up, but my you're a kid, you listen to the games, and Milt Schmidt and Dumart and Bauer were the Kraut line, but they had a second line center named Bill Cowley, number 10, and wow. He actually won the scoring title later on in 45-46, but when the Bruins, 5 of them went to the service in late in the middle of the season or near the end of the season. He was too old to go in, but he was a guy that my mother got me a Boston Bruin jersey. So I was all Boston for about 10 years until I started playing youth hockey. But it's so funny because every time we used to play Boston, or even when I meet now, it's amazing because I keep up talking to Bobby Orr a lot. And he's a wonderful man, and I call him on his birthday, and he calls me on mine, and and then I know Jimmy Montgomery because Pierre knows I played sports with Jimmy's dad in Montreal. He was a high school football player, and a junior football player, And Jimmy's dad passed away 3 years ago, and that was his father's name, Jimmy.
Okay.
So I got a Boston connection. I got my daughter there, and it's strange. I see them running around with Boston Bruin jerseys on, and they're Bostonians.
Bill Cowley, what amazing! We were talking about him a lot because I was lucky enough to be. I was on the selection committee, Scotty.
Good.
Who's the all-time Bruins? It's a centennial season, and we were talking about Bill Cowley a lot. I never knew enough about him. I mean, he was amazing.
His point, he nearly averaged 2 points a game.
Yeah,
I didn't know that. I was surprised,
carried them when the Kraut line went away. He really carried that team.
You know, the best thing they ever said about Bill Cowley though was because he played during the wartime. He was older than the other guys. They said Bill Cowley made more wings than Boeing. And that's true. They put different line. I don't remember all the guys. I know he played with a guy, Lyle Wiseman, but I followed the Bruins. I mean, I think one reason I like to follow them too, they won the 2 cups in 39 and 41. And then later on, I had a good attachment with a player that I don't think ever got the credit that he ever deserved, although he's retired, Dick Clapper, number 5. He was the president of our team in Peterborough. And I mean, Milt Schmidt, on many occasions, told me, we had some tough players on our team. And everybody remembers Eddie Shore because he was a real tough cookie. And he said, I'm not sure if they met. He said, Dick Clapper had such a long fuse. He didn't, I don't know if you know the story, but he played forward. He made the All-Star team in 1933 or 34, scored over 28, 30 goals. And then when Shore went out, they put him back on defense. He made the second All-Star team, playing defense. And he never said that. I mean, I used to try to talk to him about hockey, and he was always, he was a wonderful man. He was our president. But, he got in a lot of trouble in the league in 1936. And Pierre might know about this. But there was a big brawl. And Clarence Campbell was the referee. And he punched the referee. He was trying to punch a player, and he landed right on the ref. I mean, he was such a great player. People were talking about a 1-year suspension. I mean, it happened near the end of the season. It's in his book that he wrote. So then what they did, they had a hearing in Montreal. And fortunately, Clarence Campbell had been a Rhodes Scholar, and they all were at the meeting. And he said, just as much my fault as Clapper's. He said, I told him to get out of here, you son of a... That's what he told him. And they fined him $100. $100.
The great Paul Newman in Slapshot, if you remember the line, it's one of the best lines. The all-time greats, Dick Clapper, Eddie Shore, Toe Blake. Come on, those are the all-time greats. Paul Newman knew that too, Scotty.
Yeah, that's right.
I got a connection with Boston, Dick Clapper. And I really got to know, and what a humble man, because I was on different teams, but I really enjoyed anytime I could, because I admired him as a player, Milt Schmidt. I saw him play. I mean, there's no player, like if you could reincarnate a player, I mean, I still think Gordie Howe is really hard to beat complete, because offense, defense, and toughness. Milt Schmidt, he only had a few fights in the league, and that's the reason is he didn't lose any.
Nobody wanted to try.
It's great stuff.
Jimmy, this has been amazing. Scotty, we cannot thank you enough for your time.
Nice. Yeah. Thank you
so much.
Always
good luck with your podcast. I liked your one with Greg Brown because, I'm pretty friendly with his brother Doug. And actually, we drafted Greg in Buffalo. That's another guy Bucky Kane spotted, being from Boston. But it was hard for guys in those. Our team wasn't that strong, but I know reports on him as a coach, what he did, and you had it on the podcast, and the family, and Doug came down, like he was with the Bruins on their father's trip, and he came down because Patrick played one of the 2 games in Florida.
That's right.
They're a wonderful family. Good luck, guys.
Thanks,
all right,
Scotty.
thanks a lot, Scotty. Appreciate it.
Bye.
Scotty Bowman joining us here on the eye test, and Pierre, people always say to us, how lucky we are to be doing what we're doing, and we are. But it's sometimes I think, in the heat of the moment and, the grind of the job, you kind of forget that. Those are the moments that remind you of it.
So there's so many points that he brought up, and they're so lucid. I mean, you just think about the amount of time he spent on the road, and his recall is amazing. Full disclosure, I lived and was roommates with the man for 2 years. And, I think it's important for people to understand, as great as a hockey person that Scotty is, far better friend, a most amazing husband, phenomenal father. I'm just going to tell you, I've seen a lot of the stuff that he used to do for his family when we were working together in Pittsburgh. And I'll give you an example, Jimmy. We would have a game on, let's say, a Saturday afternoon in Pittsburgh, and the team would be going somewhere on Sunday. Scotty would get in his car Saturday, drive to Buffalo from Pittsburgh, spend Saturday night there having dinner with his family, go to church with them on Sunday morning, and then meet the team Sunday night. Wow. Wherever we were. And this wasn't just once or twice. This happened over the course of a year. And that's just one example. I mean, just as a friend, we talk hockey most of the time when we're together, but just the loyalty and the camaraderie and the life lessons and the mentorship, you can never repay that. So the only thing I try to do is pay it forward to other young coaches. And Scotty used to tell me all the time, I learned from Toe Blake, and I learned from Sam Pollock, and I learned from Frank Selke Sr., and I learned from Lynn Patrick. And so all those life lessons he learned from them, he passed on to some of us, and I've tried to pass those on. But I can just tell you this right now, he's a living legend, number one, and he is the best coach in the history, I think, of all professional sport. Forget hockey. All professional sport. And I say that with respect to Don Shula, Vince Lombardi, all the great managers in baseball, all the great coach, Red Auerbach in basketball. I don't think anybody has won as much as he has as a coach.
No, they haven't. And also just the amount, the different generations that he's coached, Pierre, is amazing. And the way the game changes so much every decade or every 5 years and even more, he just adjusts. And that I think is one of his most amazing accomplishments, is when you can talk to him about the pointers of coaching in any era, including right now. And that's what I love talking to him about. I learned so much every time I speak to that man.
He used to tell me all the time, I coached in 5 decades, and he did the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and into 2002. That's 5 decades. Yep. And he said every single one of those decades, the youth were different.
Yeah.
Everything was different. And so he had to adjust. And one of the things he did is he studied what his children did. Now, obviously, they were younger back in the 60s and 70s, but in the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s, they weren't. No. And so it was kind of interesting when he would tell me that stuff. And he always had a plan for everything. And so I think a lot of that probably came from the attention to detail of Sam Pollock.
Yes.
Mr. Pollock was amazing. I had a chance to know him early in my career. He wasn't working in the league anymore, but I spoke to him on numerous occasions. I think some of that was set up by Scotty, but pretty amazing. Jimmy, this has been a ton of fun. I mean, this is what, our 8th or 9th show?
Yeah.
This was one of the great opportunities. I'm so grateful to Scotty, and I know you are too. And the fact that he even acknowledged the Greg Brown interview, I think, is really cool.
I know. The important eyes are watching, and we appreciate all you out there as well. Pierre, we'll have another one coming on, another good guest on Friday too. I mean, no Scotty Bowman, but he's doing a heck of a job down in college hockey, and that's Greg Carvel of UMass. I'm looking forward to that.
Well, I can tell you one thing right now. Scotty Bowman helped draft Greg Carvel with the Pittsburgh Penguins. I was there sitting right next to him. We drafted Carvel in Pittsburgh in the supplemental draft in, I'm going to say 1991.
Wow.
So
it's all connected to Scotty.
Scotty's always had an eye out for Greg. He's always been a huge fan of Greg's, and obviously winning the national championship and coaching great players at UMass and great players at St. Lawrence and doing some winning at St. Lawrence too. Carvel's a phenomenal coach. He's a great person. I'm proud of the relationship I've had with him over time, and I can't wait to speak to him on Friday.
That's going to be a good time. But thank you for setting this up, Pierre. And Jimmy Murphy, Pierre McGuire here on another edition of the Eye Test. We'll talk to you on Friday.
And that's a wrap. Hope you don't miss us too much until next time. Follow the Eye Test with Pierre McGuire and Jimmy Murphy on YouTube, Facebook, Google Play, and Apple Podcasts.